Xi Jinping's fired his top military general, Zhang Yusha, amid rumours of treason, corruption and scandal.
Now, we have got these sort of dribs and drabs of rumours coming out, and the statements seem to first of all imply, corruption in a broader sense. Also, one of the most wild rumours that's been put out is that he was selling or giving nuclear weapon secrets to the Americans, which, seem frankly pretty unlikely.
It's a stunning sacking in an ongoing purge of the armed forces, but the crackdown goes even further. Around 1 million Chinese have been disciplined in Xi's drive against corruption. So with the military in crisis and Xi clearing the decks, what does this mean for China's ambition to take Taiwan? I'm Nicole Johnston, and you're listening to 7am. Today, expert in US-Asia relations at the Harvard Kennedy School and co-host of the China podcast Face Off, Rana Mitter, on Xi's purge for power. It's Thursday, January 29. Rana, thanks for speaking with me today. Let's start with Zhang Yusha. Who is he, and what do we know about why he was sacked?
So Zhang Yusha was, until just a few days ago, the first vice chairman of the CMC, the Central Military Commission of China. Probably the best way to understand that is that he was the most senior uniformed officer. But just a couple of the terms that had been used to explain General Zhang and also one of his colleagues who was also fired at the same time. One was endangering the Communist Party's ruling foundation, the exerting a vile influence on the party, and perhaps the most significant one, undermining the chairman's authority, meaning Chairman Xi Jinping, of course. And when they did this, they said that they needed to eliminate ideological toxins and promote organizational healing. So some pretty fruity language being used there. This is pretty much unprecedented. So the Central Military Commission has generally had 6 people on it, and really it's very rare for anyone to disappear in an untimely fashion from the Central Military Commission, let alone what's happened in the last year or two, which is of the 6, not 1, not 2, but 5 have gone, basically been purged on the grounds of corruption or other charges. Zhang Yusha is certainly the most spectacular, the most senior. Nobody thought that he was vulnerable. He clearly was. If I were, the 6th one there, Jiang Xiaomin, I might be a little nervous at the moment in terms of where that might be going. But certainly in terms of thinking about, the real top ranks of China's military being, swept away. The guess, so far it's just a guess, but let's put it out there. The next 5 who get put into those positions will be even more people who basically do what Xi Jinping tells them to do.
There's also a personal element to this. Xi's fired one of his own because they're both considered princelings in the Communist Party from similar backgrounds, aren't they?
That's right. There are long-standing family connections between the two that go back decades. Yet another reason why people, probably like me, were under the impression that, well, actually, it seems very unlikely that he's going to get kicked out because there's such a long history between them. But of course, often family or cohort or peer relationships can be the most bitter as well as the most close. At least in this case, it appears that family closeness hasn't saved them.
The seriousness in tackling corruption in China is clear. President Xi Jinping, who is also General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, says corruption threatens the party's very survival, and he's vowed to fight it at every level, or as he put it, from the tigers to the flies.
Rana, just broadly, could you give us a bit of a sense of how widespread this campaign of purging has been since Xi came to power?
Very broadly speaking, purging has been very widespread under the title of anti-corruption. That's the phrase that used in an institution called the CDIC, the Central Discipline Inspection Commission, as a kind of special, super FBI with absolutely no recourse for people who are arrested under it. They can hold you incommunicado for, I think, at least 6 months, probably longer than that if they really want to. And it's been used to strike terror into the heart of corrupt officials in particular. But actually, the taking down of civilian officials has been going on now for well over a decade. And of course, we think about, the ones who are perhaps at the very top elite level. Those are the ones who catch headlines in the Western world. But actually, you can see that way down at the provincial level and elsewhere, there's been a tremendous amount of anti-corruption activity going on.
As you said, Xi Jinping has said that this is all about weeding out that corruption, or the rot as he calls it. But is this really more about consolidating total control for him over the armed forces?
I think it is almost certainly about that. And it has a rather ironic implication in the short and the long term. Because in the short term, it might actually make the prospect of a war between China and, say, the United States actually less likely in the near future. Why? Because if Xi Jinping thinks that this is the time to really concentrate inwards, to be purging the armed forces at the senior level and beyond, to remake them in a different image, maybe his own image, that's not the best moment at which, on the grounds of morale, preparation, and so forth, to launch any kind of really major military campaign. I think there's unlikely to be any kind of massive confrontation this year anyway, because both the United States and China have a vested interest in the April summit between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump going well. But that doesn't say much about where things might be in 3-5 years' time, when presumably the purges will have taken effect, where the new cadre of Chinese military leaders will be even more in Xi's image than they were before. And then the idea that maybe they will be much more beholden to him rather than to the party structures might be more significant.
Coming up, what Xi's military shakedown means for Taiwan. Rana, let's talk firepower. I saw some of it myself at the Zhuhai Air Show in southern China about a year ago.
You hang out at the coolest places, Nicole. What can I say?
I know. As we know, they're expanding shipbuilding, missiles, nuclear, drones. Could you take us through some of that firepower? What have they got?
Yeah, for instance, the development in the last couple of years or so of greater capacity to do amphibious attacks, land and sea combined, using new kinds of rolling barges and other equipment of that sort, might or might not indicate that an assault on Taiwan was being prepared for. Drone technology is something that China is really continuing to perfect, and one of the testing grounds they have is essentially giving the technology, not the drones themselves, so to be clear about that, but some of the technology that can shape it to the Russians for their war in Ukraine. But also a space force, and Donald Trump, in fact, established a space force in his first term on the US side, but China's had one for quite some time. Nuclear forces, and again we see the new building of missile silos up in Gansu province in the northwest of China, and cyber. Cyber warfare is, the warfare of the mid-21st century.
All of this was on display at the massive military parade that we had in Beijing last year. Putin, Kim Jong-un was there. What was the message that Xi was trying to send to the world there?
One of the things that was very notable about the military parade was quite how much it concentrated on hardware. I mean, huge numbers of missiles, tanks, other pieces of equipment being paraded through Tiananmen Square. But the vast majority of what we saw was very much about China today being, a fierce, nationalistic country that no longer is willing to even contemplate going back to the days of World War II and around then, when China was a victim in the world, instead reconstituting itself as one of the hegemons, one of the leaders of the world. And that military equipment that we saw being paraded through was in some senses a symbolic but very, very clear indication of how the capacity to use force is now something that China has developed as part of its own sense of its own identity, and has no intention, I suspect, of ever letting go again.
Humanity again has to choose between peace and war, dialogue and confrontation, win-win cooperation and zero-sum game.
The world's been waiting and watching to see if and when China will take Taiwan by force, even though China, for its part, continues to insist that what it wants is peaceful reunification. But how does this purge actually affect China's readiness for war?
I think that in the unlikely event of a full-scale invasion of Taiwan, I do think it's relatively unlikely because it would be an extraordinarily difficult maneuver to bring off. But assuming that Xi Jinping and the military leadership came together and actually wanted to do it, the military purges make it much less likely in the short term. If you're going to undertake an operation that demands that level of skill and ability to pull off a huge endeavor, makes D-Day look fairly amateur, I would say, in some ways, because of the distances involved, then you want to have your armed forces on their best possible form, right in the middle of reeling from the, continuing bang, bang, bang of the loss of these top figures, and indeed many mid-level figures as well. I would say that this does not seem the best state of the armed forces that will be in a position to undertake an action like the invasion of Taiwan. Doesn't mean at all that it would never happen, but that I think that recent events, including the purges, make it in the short term much less likely.
But at the same time, we have had these military drills escalating around Taiwan over the last couple of years.
Yes, we have. And I often think that it's when China really pushes hard and makes these huge gestures that actually it's just a sign saying, we haven't forgotten about you, we know we're still there. But there's an extent to which there's a performance element, a pretty frightening performance element, to these continuous military exercises. And certainly people on Taiwan, where I was just a few weeks ago, have sort of got used to it. Not to say that this isn't dangerous. I mean, again, nobody, certainly including me, can say that it's impossible that a military assault on Taiwan or a naval blockade or quarantine or other kind of grey zone tactic might not be used on Taiwan, but it's unlikely to happen.
So, Rana, what does this spectacular military downfall at the very top tell us about how Xi is running the armed forces and running the rest of China?
I think it's fair to say that he's now running the armed forces as he has been running the rest of China, which is with an increasing sense of quite personalistic dominance. Now, it's important to make distinctions. Vladimir Putin is probably the best example of someone who has reconstituted the entire government around him. Xi hasn't either tried, nor I think is he able to do that, because the party structures and other people within it still actually remain very, very powerful in many senses. But the shift over the last 15 years or so has been noticeable. Back in the 2000s, 2010s, China took pride in the fact that it had what it called a collective leadership. Xi Jinping did away with all of that when he came to power in 2012. Having got the position, he turned on a sixpence very, very quickly and started to really purge power centers that might push back against him. That was when the very first pushes against the PLA started to happen. So I think we've already seen the blueprint really over the last 15 years that a Xi China is a more personalistic one, it's more nationalistic. It's one that, as Donald Trump himself has observed more than once quite admiringly, has created a sort of strongman type of vision of what government is that actually has proved increasingly attractive to leaders elsewhere who seek to emulate that kind of action.
Rana, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks very much, Nicole. It's been a pleasure.
Also in the news, David Littleproud looks set to face a challenge for the Nationals' leadership on Monday. Rogue backbencher Colin Boyce says he will move a spill motion after Littleproud's decision to remove the Nats from the coalition last week. Boyce claims the split is political suicide for the National Party. Littleproud fended off a leadership challenge from Matt Canavan, who has far more support than Boyce after the last election. And there are fears the Reserve Bank could be primed for an interest rate hike after a higher-than-expected rise in inflation. A big jump in prices for tourist travel and the end of the electricity subsidy saw annual inflation rise to 3.8%. All four major banks are now tipping a rate rise next week. I'm Nicole Johnston. This is 7am. Thanks for listening.